Have you ever made a choice you knew was wrong, but felt you had no other way out? A choice that felt like stepping off a cliff in the dark, hoping something would catch you. That was me, standing at the altar, smiling for the cameras while my soul was screaming. I was marrying Arthur Vance, a man twice my age, the untouchable king of our small town. I thought I was trading my freedom for security, but I was about to learn that some cages aren't made of gold. They're made of fear, and the escape costs more than you could ever imagine. This isn't a love story, it's a story of survival. My name is Eliza. I grew up in Havenwood, a small town nestled in the Appalachian Hills, where everyone knows your business. After my parents died, my Aunt Carol took me in. I thought she was my saviour, but she was just a different kind of warden. Every day was a reminder of what I owed her, how I was a burden she graciously carried. When Arthur Vance, the owner of the biggest company for 100 miles, took an interest in me, Carol saw her payday. He was charming on the surface, a pillar of the community, but his eyes held a cold, possessive glint that I chose to ignore. Carol convinced me it was the only way out for both of us. Marry him, and all our problems would disappear. The alternative was being thrown out on the street with nothing. So I said yes, silencing the dread that coiled in my stomach like a snake. The wedding reception was a blur of champagne, fake smiles, and the suffocating weight of Arthur's hand on my back. He paraded me around like his newest acquisition, a prized piece for his collection. "Isn't she perfect?" he'd boom to his business associates, his grip tightening whenever I tried to step away. Aunt Carol was beaming, her eyes glittering with greed as she accepted congratulations. The whole town was there, celebrating my good fortune, completely oblivious to the fact that I felt like a lamb being led to slaughter. The band played a slow song, and Arthur pulled me onto the dance floor. "You're mine now, Eliza," he whispered, his breath smelling of expensive whiskey. "Forever." It wasn't a promise of love. It was a declaration of ownership. The music faded, but the chilling finality of his words echoed in my ears. The drive to his house was silent and tense. He lived in a cold, modern mansion perched on a hill overlooking Havenwood, isolated from the rest of the world by a thick forest and a long, winding driveway. The place felt more like a fortress than a home. Inside, everything was steel, glass, and stark white walls, sterile and unwelcoming. "Let me show you something special," Arthur said, his voice taking on an unnerving edge. He led me down a long, dimly lit hallway, away from the grand living spaces. He stopped at a heavy, soundproof door and unlocked it with a key he wore on a chain around his neck. My heart pounded against my ribs. I had a sudden, overwhelming urge to run, but my feet felt rooted to the polished concrete floor. He pushed the door open, revealing not a bedroom, but a room that made the blood freeze in my veins. It wasn't what I expected, but it was so much worse. The room was a high-tech surveillance hub. A wall of monitors showed live feeds from hidden cameras all over the house, the grounds, and even from inside my old apartment at Aunt Carol's. My stomach churned as I saw footage of myself, sleeping, reading, crying. But the most horrifying part was the opposite wall. It was covered, floor to ceiling, with photographs of me. Candid shots taken over years. Me at my high school graduation. Me walking to my dead-end job at the diner. Me sitting alone on a park bench. He had been watching me, studying me like a specimen, long before he ever spoke a word to me. This wasn't a marriage. It was an abduction. "I've been waiting for you for a very long time, my dear," he said softly, locking the door behind us. The click of the lock was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. Panic gave me a strength I didn't know I possessed. As he turned to one of the monitors, gloating about his meticulous planning, I saw my chance. I grabbed a heavy glass paperweight from a nearby desk and threw it with all my might at the main server rack. Sparks flew and the monitors flickered and died, plunging the room into near darkness, lit only by the faint glow of the hallway light under the door. Arthur roared in frustration, and in that moment of confusion, I fumbled for the emergency release switch next to the door jamb, a feature he'd probably installed for fire safety, not for his captive bride to escape. The heavy door swung open, and I didn't hesitate. I ran down the sterile hallway, my expensive wedding shoes slipping on the polished floor. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get out of that prison. I burst out a side door and into the frigid night air. I was wearing only a thin satin robe over my slip, having changed out of my wedding dress moments before Arthur's terrifying tour. The sharp gravel of the driveway cut into my bare feet, but I didn't feel the pain. Adrenaline was afire in my veins. I ignored the driveway and plunged directly into the dark, imposing woods that surrounded the property. Branches tore at my robe and scratched my skin, but I kept moving, fueled by raw terror. The sounds of the forest were deafening, the snap of a twig, the hoot of an owl, each one sounding like Arthur's footsteps behind me. I could hear him shouting my name from the house, a sound filled with a rage that promised terrible things. I just pushed deeper into the suffocating darkness, with no destination, no plan, only the desperate need to put as much distance as possible between me and that monster. After what felt like an eternity of stumbling through the woods, I recognized a familiar landmark, an old oak tree that marked a path back towards town. My only thought was to get to Aunt Carol. Despite her greed, I believed that even she would be horrified by what I had discovered. Surely she would protect me. I limped through the back alleys of Havenwood, a ghostly figure in a tattered white robe, hiding in the shadows to avoid being seen. The journey to her small, familiar house was agonizing. My feet were bleeding, my body was a canvas of scratches and bruises, and I was shivering uncontrollably from the cold and the shock. When I finally saw the warm light of her living room window, a wave of relief washed over me. I was safe, or so I thought. I crept towards the window, about to knock, when I heard her voice from inside. Aunt Carol was on the phone, her voice a sickening mix of feigned concern and syrupy sweetness. "Of course, Arthur. I'm just sick with worry," she cooed. "That ungrateful girl. After everything you've done for her." My blood ran cold. I pressed my ear against the cold glass of the window, listening to the betrayal. "Don't you worry a bit. The second she shows her face here, I'll call you. We'll tell her everything is fine, that it was all a misunderstanding. She won't run from me." There was a pause. "Yes, the final payment. I understand. It'll be my pleasure to help." She hadn't just sold me into a marriage. She was selling me back to my captor. The last ember of hope I had cherished died in that moment. I was completely and utterly alone. I backed away from the window, the tears freezing on my cheeks, and slipped back into the shadows of the night. I wandered the deserted streets of Havenwood in a daze, a ghost haunting the town that had raised me. Every lit window was a reminder of a life I could never have, a safe place I didn't belong. The town was a cage, and Arthur and my aunt were the keepers. I had to get away, further than just the other side of town. My dazed wandering eventually led me to the edge of the woods again, near an old, barely used service road. Just as despair was about to consume me, my eyes caught a small, weathered wooden sign half hidden by overgrown bushes. It read, "Sisters of Serenity Retreat, a sanctuary for women. All are welcome." It felt like a sign from a higher power, a tiny pinprick of light in my all-consuming darkness. With nothing left to lose, I followed the narrow dirt path indicated by the sign, praying it wasn't another trap. The path led to a collection of simple, rustic cabins nestled deep in the woods, surrounding a larger main lodge. A warm, gentle light glowed from within. I knocked on the door of the lodge, my knuckles trembling. A woman with kind eyes and silver hair opened it. Her name was Sister Agnes. She took one look at my torn robe, my bleeding feet, and my terrified expression, and simply said, "Come in, child. You're safe here." She didn't ask questions. She just wrapped me in a warm blanket, gave me a bowl of hot soup, and showed me to a small, clean room with a simple bed. For the first time, in what felt like a lifetime, I wasn't being watched or judged. I collapsed onto the bed and cried until there were no tears left, eventually falling into a deep, exhausted sleep, protected by the quiet walls of the sanctuary. The next few weeks at the retreat were a quiet balm on my wounded soul. The sisters were a small, non-denominational group of women who had created this refuge for others fleeing from desperate situations. Life was simple and structured. We tended a large garden, cooked communal meals, and maintained the property. The work was hard, but it was honest. It grounded me, giving my frantic mind something to focus on besides my fear. Sister Agnes never pressed me for my story, but one evening, as we sat by the fire, I told her everything. She listened with a deep, unwavering compassion that unburdened my heart. She assured me Arthur would never find me here. His kind of evil, she said, was too loud and arrogant to look for someone in a place of such profound quiet. I began to feel a flicker of strength returning, a sense of self I thought had been extinguished forever. After a few months, I had settled into a rhythm. I was no longer the terrified girl who had stumbled out of the woods. I felt stronger, more capable. One of my duties was to forage for wild berries and herbs in the forest surrounding the retreat. I came to know the woods well, finding a sense of peace under the canopy of ancient trees. It was on one of these foraging trips, deep in a part of the forest I hadn't explored before, that I heard a sound that wasn't natural, a pained groan followed by the snap of a dry twig. My first instinct was to run, to retreat to the safety of the sanctuary, but something held me back. It was a sound of desperation, not aggression. Cautiously I moved toward the sound, pushing aside a thicket of ferns, my heart pounding with a familiar mix of fear and a newfound hesitant courage. Huddled at the base of a large rock formation was a man. He was gaunt and pale, his clothes torn and dirty. He had a nasty gash on his forehead, and his eyes were clouded with fever and exhaustion. When he saw me, he flinched, trying to push himself further into the rock, but he was too weak. "Please," he rasped, his voice dry and cracked. "Don't call anyone, I'm not going to hurt you." I saw not a threat, but a reflection of my own desperation. From that terrible night, I remembered the kindness Sister Agnes had shown me, a kindness without questions. I slowly approached him, took the water bottle and apple from my pack, and set them on the ground a few feet away from him. "Here," I said softly, "you need this more than I do." He stared at the offerings, then at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, cautious gratitude. He drank the water in slow, pained sips, as if he hadn't had any in days. I learned his name was Leo. I didn't ask what he was doing out here, and he didn't offer any explanation. I told him I would come back the next day with more food and some basic medical supplies. It was a risk. The sanctuary was supposed to be a secret, a place free from the troubles of the outside world. But I couldn't just leave him there to die. The next day I returned as promised. He looked slightly better, the fever in his eyes having receded a little. We sat in silence for a while before he finally spoke. "You're taking a big risk helping me," he said, his voice stronger now. "You should know, I'm a fugitive. I escaped from the state penitentiary about a week ago." The words hung in the air between us, a stark and dangerous confession. Instead of being scared, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I had run from a man who was praised by the world, but was a monster in private. Maybe this man, condemned by the world, was different. "Why were you in prison?" I asked directly. He looked away, staring into the dense woods. "I was framed," he said, the bitterness sharp in his voice, "for a massive embezzlement scheme at the company I worked for. I was the chief financial officer. My boss set me up to be the perfect scapegoat. He cooked the books, laundered the money, and when the feds started closing in, he made sure all the evidence pointed directly at me. He was a respected man, a pillar of the community. No one would believe he was capable of such a thing." A cold dread began to creep up my spine as he spoke, a sense of horrifying familiarity. My voice was barely a whisper when I asked the question, already knowing the answer. "Who was your boss, Leo?" He finally turned to look at me, his eyes dark with a pain I understood all too well. "A man named Arthur Vance." The world tilted on its axis. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a web, and Arthur was the spider at its centre, catching and destroying anyone who got in his way. I was his wife, and Leo was the man whose life he had ruined to build his empire. In that moment, Leo was no longer a stranger or a fugitive. He was an ally, the only other person in the world who truly understood the depth of Arthur's evil. I took a deep breath and told him everything. The wedding, the surveillance room, the escape, my aunt's betrayal. We were two of Arthur Vance's victims, hiding in the same woods, bound by the same monster. A new, fierce determination replaced my fear. We couldn't just hide forever. We had to fight back. Leo told me that Arthur kept 2 sets of books, the official ones that the auditors saw, and his real ledgers, which detailed every illegal transaction, every bribe, every stolen dollar. He kept them in a hidden safe in his home office. That's the proof, Leo said, his voice filled with a desperate fire. If we can get those ledgers, we can destroy him. We can clear my name and make sure he can never hurt anyone again. The thought of going back to that house, that fortress of horrors, was terrifying, but the thought of letting Arthur win was even worse. I know the layout of the house, I said, my voice steady. I know where the office is. I can help you get in. For the first time, we had a plan. We had hope. But we couldn't do it alone. We were 2 fugitives with no resources. Leo said he knew one person who might help, a man named Vince who operated in the shadowy corners of the world, a man who owed Leo a favour. He's not a good man, Eliza, Leo warned, but he hates people like Vance even more than he hates the law. To contact him, we needed a phone. I confessed my situation to Sister Agnes, telling her about Leo and our connection to Arthur. She was quiet for a long time, and I feared I had broken her trust, but then she went to a lockbox and handed me a small roll of cash. Justice is a form of serenity too, she said. Be careful, child. With that money, I bought a cheap burner phone from a gas station in the next town over. That night, under the stars, Leo made the call. The meeting was set for a dingy, smoke-filled bar 50 miles away. Vince was a large, imposing man, with a network of scars on his knuckles and eyes that missed nothing. He listened to our story without expression, sipping his whiskey. Vance is a snake, he grunted when Leo finished. And I hate snakes. He agreed to help, but not with a simple break-in. You go in there, you'll get caught. Vance has security you don't even know about. You need more than proof. You need leverage. You need a lawyer. He made a call, and an hour later, a man walked into the bar who seemed completely out of place. He was young, clean-cut, and wore a well-fitted suit. This is Daniel, Vince said. He's a shark, and he's got a personal reason to hate white-collar criminals. Daniel listened to our story, his expression growing more intense with every word. Daniel was sharp and strategic. The ledgers are great, but a good defense lawyer can paint you, Leo, as a disgruntled employee getting revenge. We need something more, something personal that will make Vance crack. He looked at me. Eliza, you mentioned rumours about his previous wives. The old town gossip suddenly felt critically important. The story was that both of Arthur's ex-wives had suffered complete mental breakdowns and ended up in institutions. No one ever knew the details. If Arthur drove them to that point, it establishes a pattern of psychological abuse and control, Daniel explained. That's the kind of leverage that can't be easily dismissed. It paints a picture of a monster. We need to find one of them. We need her to talk. The task seemed impossible, but it was our best shot. Daniel's legal resources were formidable. Within a week, he had located Arthur's first wife, Catherine. She was living a quiet, secluded life, in a different state under her maiden name. She had been out of the psychiatric hospital for years, but was still deeply scarred by her experience. We arranged to meet her. Daniel and I drove for hours to a small suburban house. Catherine was a frail, nervous woman who jumped at every small sound. At first, she refused to speak about Arthur, the terror still fresh in her eyes even after all this time. But as I shared my own story, my own terrifying wedding night, I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. I wasn't a lawyer or a reporter. I was another woman who had seen the monster behind the mask. Slowly, hesitantly, Catherine told us her story. It was a chilling tale of gaslighting and psychological torture. Arthur had isolated her, controlled her finances, and manipulated her until she started to doubt her own sanity. He would move things in the house and claim she was losing her mind. He would tell her friends and family that she was unstable, paranoid, By the time he had her committed, everyone believed his lies. He didn't need chains or bars to build a prison, she whispered, her hands trembling. He built it inside my own head. It was my story, just a different chapter. Hearing her words, a righteous anger burned through me. By the end of our conversation, Catherine agreed to give a sworn videotape statement. We finally had our weapon. With Catherine's powerful testimony, Daniel's plan shifted. A risky break-in was no longer necessary. We were going to walk right through the front door. We have him cornered now, Daniel explained to me and Leo, who had been hiding out in a safe house provided by Vince. We have a credible witness to his sociopathic behaviour, and we have your inside knowledge of his financial crimes, Leo. We're going to confront him. We'll offer him a deal he can't refuse. He signs a full confession, exonerating you, and we agree not to release Catherine's testimony to the press. It was a bluff in a way. We had every intention of bringing him down completely. But this was the best way to get Leo cleared first. The walls were finally closing in on Arthur Vance, and we were the ones pushing them. The day of the confrontation, my heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. Daniel, Leo and I walked into the gleaming lobby of Vance Enterprises. Leo wore a disguise, but his presence was crucial. We were ushered into Arthur's top-floor office, the same place where he ruled over our town. He was sitting behind his massive desk, looking surprised and then furious to see us. "What is the meaning of this?" he snarled, his eyes locking onto me with pure hatred. "Get out!" Daniel calmly placed a tablet on the desk. "I suggest you watch this, Mr. Vance." He pressed play, and Catherine's face appeared on the screen, her voice shaking, but clear as she recounted his years of abuse. The colour drained from Arthur's face. He knew he was trapped. He tried to bluster and threaten, calling us liars and extortionists, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. He was cornered. Leo stepped forward, removing his hat and glasses. "It's over, Arthur," he said, his voice hard as steel. Daniel laid out the terms. "You sign a confession detailing how you framed Leo Porter, and this video never sees the light of day. Refuse, and it will be on every news channel by morning." Arthur stared from the tablet to Leo, then to me, his empire crumbling around him. He looked like a cornered rat. He picked up the pen, his hand shaking with rage, ready to sign the confession Daniel had prepared. It was the moment we had fought for, the moment of our victory. But just as the pen touched the paper, the doors to his office burst open. FBI agents swarmed into the room, shouting commands. "Arthur Vance, you are under arrest!" Arthur froze, his face a mask of pure disbelief. They cuffed him and began reading him his rights. It wasn't just about the fraud, or Catherine anymore. They were arresting him for a host of federal crimes. I looked at Daniel, confused. He gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. He hadn't been bluffing. He had anonymously tipped off the federal authorities, giving them enough information from Leo's knowledge to secure a warrant. He had orchestrated it so the raid would happen at the exact moment Arthur was at his most vulnerable, ensuring he couldn't escape justice on any front. Our private battle had just ended in a very public defeat for the monster of Havenwood. In the chaos of the raid, a lead agent approached Leo. "Leo Porter, we need you to come with us. Your case is being reopened." It wasn't an arrest. It was the first step toward his freedom. As they led Arthur away in handcuffs, his cold eyes met mine one last time. There was no remorse, only a chilling, empty hatred. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of him. He was just a pathetic man who had lost his power. Vince appeared in the doorway, looking pleased. "Told you the kid was a shark," he said, nodding toward Daniel. It turned out Vince had been feeding Daniel information on bigger criminal enterprises for years, using his underworld connections to help a lawyer he surprisingly respected. Their unlikely partnership was what had made this all possible. Months passed. With the ledgers recovered during the FBI raid and Leo's full cooperation, his conviction was officially overturned. He was a free man. Arthur Vance was facing a mountain of charges that would keep him in prison for the rest of his life. Aunt Carol, implicated in financial dealings with Arthur, lost everything. She tried to contact me once, but I didn't answer. Her betrayal was a wound that would never fully heal, but I was no longer her victim. The sanctuary, the Sisters of Serenity, remained a quiet refuge in the woods, a place I knew I could always return to, but my path was now leading forward, not back into hiding. The future, once a terrifying void, was now a blank page waiting to be written, and for the first time, I held the pen. Leo and I left Havenwood without a single look back. The town and its ghost no longer had any power over us. We drove for days with no destination in mind, just the open road and a sense of profound, hard-won freedom. We talked for hours, sharing stories of our lives before Arthur Vance had torn them apart, discovering the people we were underneath the trauma. We found we were more than just two survivors, bound by a common enemy. There was a quiet understanding, a deep connection that grew with every mile we travelled away from our past. We had saved each other in the woods, and now we were saving each other all over again, healing the invisible wounds that remained. One afternoon, we found ourselves on a quiet country road, looking at a small, run-down farmhouse for sale. It was surrounded by rolling hills and acres of overgrown fields. It was peaceful. It was the opposite of Arthur's coal mansion and the claustrophobia of Havenwood. "It needs a lot of work," Leo said, but he was smiling. "I'm good with my hands," I replied, smiling back. We had a small amount of money from a victims' restitution fund, enough for a down payment. It wasn't a grand palace or a life of luxury. It was something much better. It was a chance to build something real, something of our own, from the ground up. In that moment, looking at that broken-down house, I felt a sense of hope so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. We bought the farmhouse. The work was grueling but joyful. Every repaired fence, every coat of paint, was a reclamation of our lives. Leo, a man who had only ever worked with numbers, discovered a passion for carpentry, his hands skillfully bringing old wood back to life. I planted a garden, a mirror of the one that had first brought me peace at the sanctuary. We were building more than a home. We were building a new life, a future free from the shadows of our past. We were no longer defined by what had been done to us, but by what we were creating together. The fear was finally gone, replaced by the quiet, steady rhythm of a peaceful life. Our story had started in darkness and terror, but here, under the wide-open sky, we had finally found our sanctuary. In the end, Arthur Vance was sentenced to life in prison, a monster caged by his own greed and cruelty. Leo and I built our home, our life, and our love on the foundation of the freedom we fought for. We learned that the deepest scars aren't always the ones you can see, but that with courage and the help of unexpected allies, even the most broken spirits can heal. Our journey was a testament to the fact that you can escape your past and you can find light in the most profound darkness. Thank you so much for watching and for sharing this journey with me. It means the world to have your support. If this story touched you, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for more stories, and hit that notification bell. Your engagement helps more than you know. And now I want to ask you, have you ever had to trust a stranger to survive a difficult time?